Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Welcome to Crime Redefined, fans and listeners. Today we're going to find out if you can really handle true crime, right, Mehul?
Yeah, for sure.
As we're taking you inside a body decomposition facility, aka a body farm.
And not just any decomp facility, Dion. You know how they say everything is bigger in Texas? Well, today our guest is Dr. Daniel J. Wescott, and he is at the largest decomposition/taphonomy facility in the U.S. This thing is housed at Texas University, and it covers a whopping 26 acres on a ranch.
And that's crazy. The term body farm comes from a Patricia Cornwall novel of the same name. More correctly, it is referred to as a decomposition facility or taphonomy facility. Taphonomy being the study of what happens to bodies after death as they decompose and become skeletons.
Yeah. The Forensic Anthropology Research Facility at Texas State University conducts pioneering research into questions such as post-mortem interval and how bodies decompose under various conditions. So, Dion, what they're trying to do is to try to determine rates, patterns, and sequences of human decay in conditions similar to what is found in South Central Texas. Then, and this is equally fascinating, the skeletons are preserved at the renowned Osteology Research and Processing Laboratory, where they can be studied for many, many years to come.
Our guest, Daniel Wescott, earned his PhD from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where the very first body farm was created. He is currently the director of the Forensic Anthropology Center at Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas.
Okay, listeners, consider yourself warned. We're going to talk about maggots. We're going to talk about decomposition fluids. We're going to talk about bloated bodies, animal scavenging, and all of that kind of good stuff. So let's do a little stomach check and let's dive in and learn about this fascinating research that Dr. Wescott and his team are undertaking.
Dr. Wescott, we are thrilled to have you on Crime Redefined today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Well, Danny, what drew you into the field of anthropology initially?
Oh, so initially I was just interested in bones, really. I've always had a fascination with bones. And so that kind of got me started. And so when I started into college, I saw an anthropology course that was open, and I took that and kind of got involved in anthropology, especially doing archaeology and stuff like that. And then at the department that I was at, they had a library associated with the department that students could go and sit in and study and stuff. And so I was doing that one day, and one of the professors came and said, you know, that somebody had brought some bones. Did anybody want to look at them? And so I went and did that and never turned back.
As they say, the rest is history, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, Danny, you described yourself as a biological anthropologist. What exactly is that versus other branches of anthropology?
Okay, so in the United States, anthropology is really kind of divided into four fields. So you have culture anthropologists that study the culture of living people, and linguists that study the language of both past and present people, archaeologists that are really more focused on understanding the past cultures of people, and then biological anthropologists that study both living and past people, but the biology of those individuals. So how they've evolved, and this would also include close relatives, other primates.
Now, that's a great definition. I saw in one of your specialties, long bone biomechanics. Can you define that for me?
Sure. I am interested in reconstructing activity patterns of people that in the past, or looking at what individuals did, how they used their bones and stuff like that, And so kind of the idea behind this is that you're utilizing the bone structure, kind of like, well, one way of looking at it is kind of like a beam in a building or something like that. And that is that you can get an idea of the forces that were placed on that bone during life by looking at its geometric size and shape.
Like what kind of stresses it was under and et cetera.
Right. Yeah. So what kind of loading was it under? So, a lot of this, like things like, a runner versus a soccer player are going to have a slightly different shaped long bone. Same thing. And then one of the things that actually I'm doing a lot of research now is looking at how obesity affects that.
Danny, prior to heading up the Forensic Anthropology Center there at Texas State, had you worked previously at decomposition facilities or, received training there?
Yeah, I got my PhD at the University of Tennessee, which has the original facility.
What is unique about the Texas State decomposition facility? What makes you guys great?
Everything about it. No, we are. So a couple things. One is we have a large faculty, but we also have a large dedicated space. So we have 26 acres that are set aside to us. We're a somewhat unique environment, but that I think everybody could say that. But we're different from the other ones. But because of the fact that we have a large faculty of forensic anthropologists, we draw in a lot of students that are interested in doing taphonomic research. And then because of where we're located at, we get people literally from all over the world that come and visit us and do research.
Along those lines, Danny, since 2008, how many bodies would you estimate have passed through the facility, and how many are on deck, so to speak?
Well, we've had about 850 people donate their bodies.
Wow.
So as far as people that are pre-registered, I don't know for sure, but my guess is around 1,500 individuals. We usually accept between about 60 and 70 individuals a year.
Wow, some big numbers. Danny, if I were in law enforcement and I came to your facility for training, what would my week look like, and what would the training experience entail?
Well, it would depend on what you're there to train for, but a lot of what we do for law enforcement is that we set up different scenarios that would be kind of realistic and allow you to experience firsthand, what you would do out in the field, and it gives you a chance to, if you're going to mess up there, but also get an idea of think about how you would do it with the resources that you have. So we do, for example, a human remains recovery course, which involves locating and then recovering both bodies that have been on the surface, so bones that have been scattered on the surface, and then also a buried body. We do a fire death investigation course where we actually teach students how to recover the remains from fire situations. We do cadaver dog training. We do scenarios for other law enforcement where they have to kind of figure out whether the situation would be more set up as a homicide or a suicide. So a whole lot of different scenarios that can be done.
Wow. Well, I saw that you do consulting for the Texas Rangers. Presumably that's the law enforcement, not the baseball team.
Correct.
Can you think of any cases of the Rangers cases that were strongly impacted by the work coming directly out of your decom facility?
Well, yeah, I mean, we get a lot of them where, we're estimating the time since death, and that's going to have a factor. And then other cases where what we are asked to do is actually reconstruct the events that would have happened at the scene. And that comes from looking at the taphonomy too. So trying to figure out, where was the body placed? Was it moved? What position was it in when it was originally there? If it was moved, what moved it? Was it scavenged? All that kind of stuff.
Danny, I'm curious to know if you've ever had students who are excited about this, and then once they see and smell actual bodies out the facility, say, you know what, this isn't for me.
It has happened, yeah. That's another good thing about having this is that you don't spend your entire graduate career trying to figure out whether it's something you're interested in. Right. We, for the most part, no, students are pretty sure what they want to do. But I did have one grad student for sure that she went into a completely different field after spending a few months there.
Yeah, I can see that would happen on occasion. Danny, I was curious, how much of an issue are vultures at your facility, and how have they actually benefited you in terms of research?
Well, so as being in Texas, where there is a large cattle industry, we have lots of vultures. And so, matter of fact, in Texas, the vultures are the primary scavengers. And so if you have remains that are on the surface, most of the time you're going to have vultures associated with that. And so one of the things that we're interested in is trying to understand vultures. So we've had lots of different researchers that have done work on vultures, looking at everything from, just how fast did it and when do they come to, how does the clothing on the body affect the vulture scavenging, to different times of the year, and then also just their location. So, for example, we had a PhD student actually that was from LSU who was looking at the behavior of the vultures. And so she would actually capture vultures and tag the vultures and with little GPS backpacks so she could follow them.
No kidding.
And she found some pretty interesting things. So, for example, the vultures will not feed on remains if they're too far away from a water source. So that, that kind of information, though, can be very important for understanding an outdoor crime scene.
Well, you got to wash your meal down. I understand that.
It's true.
I thought that was one of the things I was reading the article in preparation for our interview with you was the vulture would sometimes break ribs, and then so in the past that might have been contributed to trauma at the time of death, but that was actually happening later. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so they will get up and display on the body, and when they're doing it, they're a big enough bird that they can actually break ribs and things like that. So that is a problem that you have. The other thing is that so vultures don't eat skin. And so the way that they enter into the body is that they basically break a hole in the skin and stick their head into the cavity. But if you get that early enough, it can actually look like somebody had gotten stab wounds or something of that nature. Yeah. We've actually had that as a case one time where they were pretty sure that somebody had cut the person's femoral artery and axillary arteries, as a way of killing them, but it was just vultures scavenging. It's just the way that they scavenge. So understanding that behavior is important. Now, if we don't want the vultures to be involved, we have to cage the bodies here.
Right. Well, walk us through a scenario where a detective needs help analyzing a body. In what ways could your facility get involved?
Well, I mean, we can do it several different ways. One, we can actually try to reconstruct a scenario that they have and actually test some different, possible hypothesis about how the body got into the position or in the condition that it was in. The other thing that we get is a lot of times that really, obviously is just estimating how long the person has been dead. So it in those cases, a lot of times they may have a suspect, but that suspect may have only had a narrow window, or something of that nature that they could have been involved in. So that the law enforcement want to know, whether the time of death fits within that time frame or not. There's, clear to things like, you have a body that is more decomposed or less decomposed than what they expected based on the last time the individual was seen. And so trying to understand possible or reasons for that. So for example, maybe the person was diabetic. And so the question would be, does diabetes cause an acceleration or deceleration of decomposition? And while we wouldn't have, enough individuals to like lay out 20 people that were that were diabetic and 20 people that weren't at any given time, we collect the same data over, every year, over years and years and years. And so as a result, if you think about 850 individuals, now we can go back and separate all the diabetics from the non-diabetic and look at those rates and actually get some statistical analyses that done to, that could be used.
That's a really interesting answer. And I have a quick follow-up. Do you I take in the medical information from the people who donate their bodies to your facility and then track that so you can have that not just for diabetics, but across the board that could lead to varying, time scenarios and degrees of decomposition depending on the location?
Yes. So that is one of the important parts of our donation program. The way that our donation program is set up is that we preferably have people that are pre-registering. And as a result, they know what's going to happen to their body. They're interested in what's going to happen. And so they provide a lot of information like that. And so, like I said, a lot of that, it may be that, it's not the question you're always asking, but you can always go back. For example, an interesting thing that might be is to go back and look at individuals that listed that they had been on antibiotics prior to their death. And does that have an effect on, when they were colonized by flies or, anything like that? Because all that kind of stuff is going to slightly change, the not necessarily the pattern, but the rate at which the body is going to decompose, right? So, for example, most of the mass loss during decomposition is actually due to fly larvae or, maggots feeding on the body. But if you have something that delays those maggots or delays the flies from coming, then that can
throw off your timeline, right?
Yeah.
Well, Danny, you've kind of painted this picture a little bit already, but I want to dig a little bit deeper and ask you, right now at your facility, what's kind of the range of conditions that these bodies are exposed to? And maybe to put it another way, what are the type of sort of crime scene scenarios that you're trying to mimic?
Okay, so for us, what most of it is going to be is either a body that's on the surface or a body that's in a shallow burial, usually. We do have other projects, like we have a mass grave project where they're buried fairly deep, and that's actually, we can talk about later if you want to. But for the most part, what's going to happen in, associated with human remains that are disposed of, associated with some kind of crime, is they're either usually going to be placed on the surface and concealed some way, usually under like a tree, or they're going to be concealed by covering them with brush or something of that nature. And then, like I said, the other is to bury them. In my experience, over 25 years or so that I've been doing this, is that buried bodies, they're either buried really shallow or really deep, and nothing really much in between. And the idea there is if you're doing it by hand, you're usually going to get tired out pretty quickly, especially if you're in this part of Texas where it's pretty hard clay with lots of limestone rock in it. Or you have equipment available and you're digging a pretty deep hole. But even then, you're only going to be able, and where we're at, you're only going to be able to go down maybe 3 feet before you hit bedrock. So those are the kind of scenarios that we set up. And, some of the research that we do is actually just like, can you use, for example, drones to fly over areas and find these different locations. That's, one of the first steps is a lot of times you have an idea of where a body might be, but you don't know exactly. And sometimes that, and like in Texas, that may be, the last time this person was seen was on, this ranch, and this ranch is, 5,000 acres. So that's a lot of territory to cover.
Well, in your answer just now, Dan, you kind of teased that you maybe have some more to tell us about like the bodies that are buried deeper and how you handle that at your facility.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you want to know. I mean, in that sense, we do like, what you would expect is we get a backhoe out there and we dig a hole and we place the body. And then what we do is we'll put like moisture and temperature probes within the body that we can monitor. And then we, monitor the differences in the soil temperature, the air temperature, things like that. There isn't really a good way of like monitoring visually the body, except that one way that you can do that is that if you can occasionally, depending on the how your research project is set up, you might, at a certain point, excavate the body, see and see what, condition it's in and whether it's decomposing as you would expect.
What, if any, role does DNA sample collection play in your research? Are you involved in any of that, studying what you can get DNA from and what the best testing is and what the DNA might look like, or any of that kind of stuff?
Sure. I mean, that's always a case that you're interested in. So we have done research with other people. We don't ourselves do the DNA research, but we, one of the things about forensic science research is that it is very multidisciplinary. So we team lots of different people, but, even things like if you have a skeleton that has been exposed to solar radiation from the sun for years and years and years, it's going to break down and disintegrate that DNA. And so at what point can you recover it? And then, or, which parts of the bone are you going to get the best recovery from?
Right.
And stuff like that. Same thing with fire, is that, if you have like a complete cremation, you're not going to recover any DNA. But in most cases, bodies, unless it's a professional crematorium, they're not going to be cremated completely. And so there are a lot of times you can recover DNA. And so it's just which bones are going to work best for that. And how can you tell that visually, for example?
And then, Danny, what would you say are some of the most exciting findings that have come from your research at your decomp facility? Before your answer, I kind of want to reframe it this way. Now that you guys have had this and you're up and running, what are some, traditional decomposition theories that having your facility has turned upside down, or are there any?
I don't know if there's any that is completely turned upside down. I mean, there are fairly simple things that, like when I first started doing research in this, one of the ways that you can find, for example, buried remains is by looking for differences in the vegetation. And when I first started here and I was reading about stuff, it was pretty common for, people to say that the reason for the vegetation difference had nothing to do with the fact that there was a body in there. It was totally the fact that you disturbed the soil. You'd turn the soil and everything else, which makes kind of sense. If you go into your lawn, and you have this nice grass and you dig a hole and then you fill that hole back up with soil, it's not your grass that's going to grow back right away. It's going to be weeds, right? But it turns out that may be true for a little while, but the body really does make a huge difference in the vegetation growth and stuff on there. Some of the most interesting stuff that I think has been done here is, like I said, is actually, so when I talk about the research done here, it's not necessarily me doing this research. It's people that are coming here to do the research. And so for example, looking at a group out of Texas A&M and Michigan State were looking at bodies, and they were isolating flies, and then they, and trying to figure out what attracts flies and stuff. And one of the things that they found was that it's the bacteria and other microbes in your body that actually signal the flies to come. And then those flies, when they come, actually have a peptide in their saliva that is beneficial to those microbes. And that kind of starts that decomposition process. And so if you take that part of it out, it can have a slight change. But that is, doesn't sound overly exciting, but it is a really pretty interesting finding. As a result of this, too, basically what I think we're going to find as time goes on is that the rate at which you decompose, at least at the very beginning, is going to be impacted greatly by the microbes that you already have. So your microbiome that you already have in your body. Okay. We already know clinically, the microbiome in your body affects things like, even your weight and, different things about your health. And it's going to also probably have an effect on how you decompose.
Well, I've got a little bit of a semantics question for you, Danny. In the media, a facility such as yours is known as the body farm or the body ranch. I mean, to you guys working in the field, is that an acceptable term, or would you prefer that they be called decomposition facilities?
Well, we never use the term.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
But so it kind of depends on how you're going to look at that. So, the term body farm came from Patricia Cornwell doing work out at the University of Tennessee. So she would come out to the University of Tennessee when Bill Bass had first started the facility. And, it helped her as far as develop her, fictional accounts and stuff like that. And so she's the one that kind of termed that. So in that sense, then the only body farm is the University of Tennessee. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There, in that case, as a matter of fact, I would say that if you talk to the director at the University of Tennessee, she'd probably tell you that they don't really have any objections to using that. It's also, because it's something that the community knows, the community is aware of, stuff like that. Right. But as far as when we're doing, like publishing or anything like that, it's more accurate to refer to it as a decomposition facility or a taphonomy facility, actually. It's probably more accurate. Because, or obviously not farming anything or ranching anything.
Right. So before these facilities existed, how was research done to study human decomposition?
Retrospectively. So you would, go through, medical examiners' offices, records that they had, and look at the photographs and compare that to either, when the entomological evidence suggested the times of death or the last known date of death. So that's kind of the way that most of that stuff was done. Or looking at non-human models. So, especially like a lot of the entomological work was done. So, looking at flies and other insects, looking at non-human surrogates, so like using pigs especially.
Danny, you touched on some of this, but what is the most surprising thing you've seen happen to a body at your decomp facility, whether it's you or your students or another team using your facilities?
I don't know. There's not a whole lot. The ones that surprise me is occasionally. So to give you one example, we had an individual at the very beginning of the pandemic that we got, and we were actually setting up another scenario, and this guy we were using as a control, so he was just caged, and we were looking at, and the other ones weren't. And after about a week, he was still pretty much in a fresh state of decomposition, where all the other two that we were examining at the same time were very decomposed. He had died of COVID, but then we've had many others since then have died of COVID that didn't decompose very slowly or anything like that. So it's not that. So it surprised me, and we still haven't figured out, for example, I mean, there's it has to be something where he was on some kind of drug or something of that nature that helped slow down the decomposition, but we still haven't figured out.
Oh, interesting.
That's a good example.
The other things that kind of will surprise you sometimes is, so we have a student right now that's doing research where part of the data that she collects is she goes out and weighs the bodies every day. And so we put them on a little lift, and we can lift it up and then subtract, the weight of the lift and stuff like that to look at how the body decomposes stuff. And so we've been having here in Texas, it's been, I don't know, I think we're in the 35th day of over 100-degree weather. And probably close to 20 of those have been over 105 degrees. And so the bodies are not skeletonizing. They're drying out really quickly. But it's so hot that the maggots can't really come to the surface, so they don't. So we don't get skeletonization like we normally would. But we had one individual that was probably around 300 pounds, and he lost almost half of his body weight within a few days.
Wow.
So he just kind of melted away. So those are the kind of things that, surprised me to some extent. But other than that, for the most part, everything, was within the variation that you kind of expect. With vultures, you're also always, kind of shocked at the fact that, how fast they can decompose a body once they get to it. The other thing that I would say that was kind of interesting and surprising in some senses, that in 2021 we had a heavy snow here and a power outage and stuff like that, which is not common for this area. And we had, at the time, a body that we had placed out on the surface without a cage, and to do some, as part of a vulture research project. And it turned out that lots of scavengers came to that body that would not normally come to the body. And I think that was in part because, it not only impacted, the humans by having a lot of snow and power outages, but it affected these other predators, because all of a sudden their normal source of food was, under snow, or it was harder to get around, things like that.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the animal predators that you get in that area?
So, like I said, most of what we get are vultures. Vultures are the only obligated carry-on feeder that we have, so they're the only ones that only eat dead things, right?
Mm.
Most animals are opportunistic scavengers, which means if they happen to come across the body and it happens to be in the right stage of decomposition, they may feed on it. But we get a variety of different birds that will come, and coyotes and bobcat and possum and raccoons. Those are the most common ones that we get, and mice. And then you get other things that come that you're not that may or may not really be there to scavenge. So, for instance, even like fox. We get a lot of fox that come. My guess is they're actually probably not feeding on the bodies, but feeding on the mice that come to the bodies.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Likewise, we get rattlesnakes that come. And there again, they're not obviously eating the bodies. They're there to eat the mice that are attracted to the bodies. So you can get, a variety of things like that. We actually have as far as I know, the only documentation of deer actually chewing on bones. And in our case, it's always been in the winter. And I think what they're doing is using it more like a salt lick. So they put the bone between their teeth and they rub it and they get the minerals out of it.
Right, right. Danny, do you ever testify in court as an expert witness?
Yes.
How often do you do that?
Oh, I don't know. Not that often. And, maybe 6 times a year.
Oh, do you have any interesting stories of cases or courtroom scenarios that were kind of out of the ordinary or memorable?
I don't know. No, they're all different in their own way. Courtroom testimonies are an interesting thing because, you get brought in and you can't, as an expert, you don't get to hear anything that happens in the case prior to you.
Right.
You're brought in, they ask you very, very specific questions, and then, you're asked to leave. I think you probably could stay afterwards, but in most cases you don't. So in that sense that they're kind of, they're not overly, I don't know how to put it, but so to give you an example, one case that we had that I actually testified on fairly recently, but it has been resolved, so I can talk about it, I guess.
Right.
Is we had a guy who, and he's been convicted for murdering this woman. And then what he did was he brought her out into a field and he set a fire and he burned the body. And then one thing that most people find is that bodies don't burn quite as easy as they think they do. So after a while, he took and covered it with soil, and then he put a pig on top of the soil and burned the pig. And I think his thought was that we would find the pig and think that's all he was doing.
Yeah.
But the thing about doing taphonomic stuff, like I said, is the sequence is that we could not only tell that the difference between the pig and the human, but we could tell which one was burned at which time and everything. So,
Danny, to kind of boil everything down, if a body is found dumped somewhere, what are some of the key pieces of information that law enforcement should try to determine from the body itself?
Well, I mean,
kind of like a first 48, type thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to do all kinds of stuff. So it depends on the questions you're asking. So this is what I always tell law enforcement is when you go looking for a body, before you go, you need to have asked the questions. What do you want to know? Is the time since death important to you? If it's not, then that changes how you can, you might look at it. Is where the body is located at, is that important or not? There's all kinds of things like that. So
kind of determine the scenario before you walk out onto the scene, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Right. Yeah. So, because it's going to make a difference on what you collect, what is important for you to record, because there's so much stuff there that theoretically could be collected, right? But if you're walking out on an outdoor scene, for example, is, what is the condition of the body? What is the position of the body? And, like the position of the body can actually, just as the body is decomposing, when it goes into bloat, can actually change the position of the body. So, the position the body winds up in, it may not be the position it was originally in. So then you're looking for things like what we call the cadaver decomposition item, which is the soil around the body where the fluids that associated with decomposition have been draining out of the body. So as the body is decomposed by bacteria and other microbes, it becomes liquid and it gets pushed out of the body, and whenever you have a breakdown of proteins, one of the things that you get is a lot of nitrogen. And at first, that nitrogen is in a form that is mostly like ammonia, and so it actually will kill off the vegetation. And then over time, it'll start to break down the bacteria in the soil, start to break down that nitrogen. Then it becomes like a fertilizer for the vegetation. So finding that cadaver decomposition island can tell you a lot about when the person was placed there and even where they were placed, especially if you have body that was scattered or something like that. Finding that cadaver decomposition island could make a big difference. But it also might even tell you something about the position of the body, because a lot of times you can see the outline of how the body decomposed.
You mentioned this. Does a body decompose faster face down or on its back?
I don't think it really makes much difference. Not that you can statistically detect.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. Are you working with any law enforcement, like right now, or currently on any cases, you or people from your university?
Yes.
And then, I guess just to follow up what Dion asked, what percentage of your work is, working with law enforcement in actual cases? Is that just a very small percentage of what you do?
Yeah, it's a small percentage, but you do it. And we actually have, we're constantly going back to cold cases too.
Oh, sure.
That haven't been solved and trying to figure those out. But yeah, so we may go for months without much at all, and then we have periods where actually summer tends out to be a fairly busy time for us. And then we also do stuff that's not necessarily for law enforcement. We'll do stuff that might be associated with civil cases.
Sure. Yeah.
We do consulting for families sometimes who have a disagreement with, or they don't think that what they're being told is correct. So that's the thing, is that since we don't work for law enforcement, we can address things a lot of times. And so I frequently am contacted by defense lawyers that want me to look at, something that's been done and, give an opinion on that. Or we might get involved in, a lawsuit with a funeral home or hospital or something of that nature, where we can give expert opinion on stuff. So a whole variety of different things of that nature. And then, like I said, then we also go out and do lots of searches for law enforcement.
Oh, okay.
I would say that more than half of those, you don't find anything. Sometimes we can give them an idea of why they weren't finding stuff, and sometimes you just don't know. You just, if you're working in the right area, or maybe because a lot of times where they think that the body may be is because somebody has told them that they've seen a body in that area or something like that,
right?
And then, but it may be, my guess is that a lot of times that's incorrect information.
Just curiously, where would a team located, law enforcement, furthest away? So have you received anybody from, like, let's say Japan or Central Europe?
Well, the furthest away we've done would not necessarily be analyzing the body, but analyzing photographs. And the furthest one I've done was Australia.
Just curiously, if people are interested in donating their body to your research, how do they go about doing that?
Well, so they can go to our website, which is txstate/anthropology/facts, FACTS. And then there is a tab for donations, and you can click on that. And then there is a tab or a link to for the living donor form. And the living donor form is a questionnaire that they would have to fill out and sign and everything. And then they send that in to us, and we go through it and make sure that everything is okay. And that's how they get registered with us.
I'm assuming that some people get turned down.
Yeah. So really our only restriction is that they can't be over 500 pounds at death. And they can't have certain active infectious diseases.
Yeah.
So the ones that we're most concerned about are things like tuberculosis.
Right.
Tuberculosis can last in the soil for years and years. Other ones like COVID, as far as we know, nobody's ever gotten COVID from a dead person before, so that's not a problem. Some bacterial infections, MRSA and things like that, would restrict them. And then, like I said, so we can accept two types of donations. We can accept people that pre-register with us, which is what we prefer, but we can also accept next of kin donations. So that is the legal next of kin donates the body. And those are the ones that we're more likely to turn down. So, for example, we will not accept a body from a family if they've been estranged from that.
Right.
Deceased person.
You don't get a lot of mother-in-laws, do you?
No.
Right. We don't want to be a dumping ground. We
Right.
People that are involved in this to know that they were involved in it.
Yeah.
So when we're going to accept them, typically is when they do things like they say, they call and say, my dad donated his body to you. And we say, well, we don't have any paperwork. And they're like, well, we have the paperwork right here. It's like, yeah, he never sent it in.
Right.
So we know that that's what he wanted to do, but he never got around.
Right.
The other option that we get a lot of times is, somebody will donate their body to a medical school, for example, but they're too tall or too short or too heavy or been dead too long, things like that. And the medical school rejects them. And the family is like,
now
we
what?
know that would rather be donated to science than not.
Right.
Well, Danny, I understand that you've picked out a particular area of the ranch that you'd like your body to be placed at for study when that time comes. How did you arrive at that, and how many of your coworkers are doing the same?
I would say that most of the coworkers have probably done the same. For me, I don't know. It's just, you're out there, and especially if you're out there like early in the morning or late in the evening, it's just the area that I've kind of picked is a nice area. It's under a lot of trees. There's, a lot of animal activity. It's just a quiet spot. But, in reality, I go wherever the research is needed. So, I mean, if I fit in the scenario that works, then great. If not, then, I don't.
Understood.
So the other thing too with us is that once we are done with this, we actually retain the skeletal remains, and we do research on the skeletons. And in some ways, for me, that's even the more exciting part, is that I'm going to be in a box, and literally it could be 100 years from now.
Perpetuity, yeah.
Is learning something new using my skeleton.
I got one last question. It's a little bit weird, and I'm hoping the answer is no, but have you ever had any problems with vandalism on the ranch?
Absolutely not. We have never had it. So we one is it's on a large ranch, and so people might know that it's on the ranch, but they don't know where it's at. Not only that, it is a active ranch, so we have a ranch manager and assistant ranch manager and stuff that actually live on the property.
Oh, okay.
So it's and it's fenced and locked, and it's not an easy thing to do. I don't know how much time you have here, but so when I first started working here, so I started the facility started in 2008, but I didn't come here till 2011. And one of the first, I don't know, within the first year that I was here, I got a call from the administration, and they said, you need to turn to this radio station. They are outside of your facility, and they're describing bodies there. And I'm like, oh no. So I turn over to it, and I'm, driving out there, trying to get there as fast as I can. And they are talking about the facility, and I realized they're not at our facility because they were talking about the sign, And what was funny was that they said the sign says Texas State, Forensic Anthropology Research Facility or something, but we have no sign that says. And then they started describing some of the other things that were going on, which I knew were things that were from the internet and that are actually pictures that came from the University of Tennessee. So by the time I got out there, I was not surprised to find that there was nobody.
No, glad to hear it. Well, Danny, you're doing phenomenal work there. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to share something with us. And man, the amount of knowledge you're adding to forensic pathology and taphonomy is incredible. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you.
All right. So, Mehul, I'm not sure really what this says about me, but how fascinating was that?
Yeah, the jury's still out on that.
It takes a special type of a person to be willing to work in this type of field for sure. If you want to work in a nice and sterile lab as a lab assistant, this ain't it.
Well, I mean, can you imagine the sights? And probably what's even worse is the smells that these researchers encounter. I mean, we heard some gruesome things, but we weren't smelling it. And these people are doing this all in the name of science. And man, this is important work because this is really at the center of forensic science and criminal investigations. I mean, it all starts with the body, right?
Yeah, total gut check here. I mean, I think one of the questions we said is, hey, how many people, I think I might have asked it, have dropped out of this? And I think he only had one. So, people I think kids have a really good idea of what they're getting into. And I was surprised that the dropout number wasn't a lot higher.
I thought
people have a real passion for it.
Yeah. But, this research is so needed. And what's interesting to me is, I think there's 7 body farms in the U.S. And, like Danny was saying, for any one research project, it's not like you can lay out 20 bodies and compare them. But over the years, even Danny's body farm, he had 800 have went through there. I mean, imagine the volume of data that's collected over the years, and the way that they're recovering the data is becoming even more fascinating. Now we're talking about drones and temperature probes and God knows what else. So this is a treasure trove of research in an area that's needed. I mean, just one thing that struck me was the vultures. Now obviously that's probably unique to certain parts of the U.S., but people come in there, high and mighty experts. Oh, this person was stabbed. You can see the marks on the bones, and well, guess what? It was a vulture. So we just need to add to the catalog of what are the possibilities, because in forensic science, I mean, ideally, you should be evaluating alternative possibilities. And so now you have some idea what the range are. It could be something wacky like a vulture or something like that. So this is just, what a treasure trove of research.
Yeah, I'll tag on to that and say that, in my opinion, these body farms are game changers, because you heard in the discussion of how many investigators were coming out that were working on cold cases,
right?
And so I think it is. And what was also fascinating, it wasn't some I'll use an old term, a newfangled invention, or this was just gumshoe, just basic investigation work, of just body composition. It wasn't a new special laser or a light or anything like that. This was just, if you really break it down, just basic, police work.
Yeah. I mean, this is something hard to study. In DNA, we can make mock samples and that, but before they were using pigs and stuff for bodies, which I guess was suitable, or looking at past records, like Danny said, but nothing beats the real thing. And I think a lot of people, it seems like the donors are lining up around the block.
Yeah,
and I think they see it as a noble way. I mean, I guess it could be cost cutting too, in terms of funerals and all of that. But what Danny said is, especially like the skeletons. I mean, they're going to be there forever.
Yeah, purpose after life. We didn't get into this too much. I wanted to, but we kind of ran out of time. But in the lead up in the research that we did for this, there was a component of mass graves.
Right.
And obviously with the war in the East, in Eastern Europe and stuff, that's going to be really important. And then there's other ones that have gone on over the years in various locations. And I think it's important for that as well, because where were did people perish, and then where were they buried, and now you can kind of find out who's responsible. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, these historical questions are coming up more and more because we have better technology for finding graves. Obviously DNA, when we do find remains, and just a lot more can be done. So you're right. I mean, it's like we have a never-ending supply of criminal cases, but then you've got the cold cases, you got the historical investigations, and like Danny said, even some of the civil matters, because you can imagine, some of the. I mean, we had this in forensic fraud. Remember the pathologist? He was, holding onto the brain, and so there's all that whole area as well. So I mean, this really, really checks a lot of boxes.
I want to change gears a little bit on you. And some shameless promotion. Please go check out our brand new website at crimeredefined.com. You can easily get a snapshot of episodes that might interest you by looking at the guest page, which is kind of cool. Mehul and I wanted to launch the website with a bang, and there is no doubt that this episode, as the first one on that new site, accomplishes that.
Oh, it's a one of a kind for sure. And Dion and I really, guys, we can't express enough how much we appreciate your support. Downloading us, listening to us rattle on, the social media, the follows, the comments. It's all good. We appreciate the love. And, our mission here is to, I guess, foremost educate, but also entertain, and try to make this understandable and relatable. And, we hope that we're hitting the mark. And like Dion said, I think we hit a pretty damn obscure topic today that was really fascinating.
Yeah, that's our goal, Mehul. 360 degrees of true crime. And there's just like nothing that we want to leave out and bring some kind of interesting story to it.
You know what, Dion, before we sign off, I gotta tell a couple of stories here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One of my family members was in a hospital in Illinois, and this was certainly a reputable hospital, if not prestigious. And I remember going down to the basement to go to the cafeteria, and the smell was horrible. And I thought, oh, maybe it's the food and the combination of food or whatever. So I did a little snooping, and then not far from the cafeteria, I saw some doors that were marked room M1, M2. And I could see through the top window, there was like some refrigeration equipment. So they literally had the morgue of the hospital near the cafeteria. I mean, crazy. But that the smell is probably the worst of it. I mean, I've been to different morgues and watched autopsies, and it's fascinating, but I can't imagine working in that day in and day out. I mean,
no. So let's give a shout out to Texas State. To find out more about the Forensic Anthropology Center at Texas State, check out Texas State EDU Anthropology Facts. You can also learn more about the body donation process if you're so inclined. Mehul, what do you say? You're a forensic science. Are you ready to commit your donating your body?
I'll get back to you on that, Dion. But check out our new website. I'm going to change the subject here, crimeredefined.com. You get all the info on the hosts, like Dion said, on the guests. And of course, you can find all of those episodes you want to binge on. So until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.